Dad, I don't know how to do this. Naomi cried, her hands trembling as she tried to feed my stepfather a spoonful of soup. The metal spoon clattered against the ceramic bowl as she struggled, splashing broth onto the bed sheets. Mr. Benson groaned, his voice hoarse and weak. Naomi, just bring it closer. She tried again, but her grip was awkward and the spoon nearly tipped over. Frustrated, she turned to me, her eyes filled with panic. Emily, help me, she pleaded, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around the bowl. I leaned back against the couch, crossing my legs as I took a slow sip of my iced tea. The cold liquid soothed my throat as I observed her struggle, savoring the moment. Naomi, the golden child, the princess, the one who had spent her entire life being catered to, was now forced to take care of her father. And she had no idea what she was doing. Oh, Naomi, I said, my voice laced with amusement. You need to wipe his mouth. He's drooling. She turned back to Mr. Benson, who now had soup dribbling down his chin, his once proud face reduced to a frail shadow of its former self. Her hands shook as she grabbed a napkin and dabbed at his face. Dad, I'm trying, she whined. I let out a soft chuckle. You should be more careful. You wouldn't want to spill the entire bowl, would you? Her head snapped toward me, eyes burning with frustration. Why are you just sitting there? You should be helping. I arched an eyebrow. Why would I? You always made it clear that I was the servant in this house, remember? Well, things are different now. Mr. Benson groaned, his voice weak but sharp. Emily, please. I met his gaze and saw something there I had never seen before. Desperation. It was a strange sight. This was the same man who used to bark orders at me like I was some unpaid maid. The same man who made me cook, clean, and serve his daughter like she was royalty while I lived in the shadows. Now he was the one in need. And Naomi, his perfect little princess, was utterly useless. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbow on my knee. Oh, Mr. Benson, I said sweetly, I would love to help. But I'm afraid I just don't know how. You see, I've been out of practice. Since I no longer live like a servant, I wouldn't want to mess anything up. Naomi, on the other hand, has been given everything on a silver platter. Surely she can figure this out. Naomi let out an exasperated sigh. This is ridiculous. Dad is sick. This isn't about the past. I tilted my head. Isn't it, though? For years, I had been the one forced to serve, while Naomi had been pampered like a delicate doll. Now the roles were reversed. And I intended to let her feel exactly what I had felt all those years. I took another sip of my drink, letting the ice clink softly against the glass. You'll manage, Naomi. You always act like you're so much better than me, so prove it. Show me you can do something other than paint your nails and take selfies. Naomi looked like she wanted to throw the soup bowl at my head. But she was trapped. She had no choice but to take care of her father because for the first time in her life, I refused to be the one to clean up after them. Mr. Benson coughed weakly. Emily, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I stared at him for a long moment, my heart beating steadily. Was he sincere? Or was he just saying that because he needed me now? I decided it didn't matter. You should save your strength, I said, standing up and stretching. You have a long road ahead. But don't worry, Naomi will take excellent care of you. Naomi let out a frustrated groan as she accidentally spilled soup on the sheets. I smirked. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one suffering. And I had no intention of changing that. That was the day everything shifted. To truly understand why I was sitting back and watching my stepfather and stepsister struggle, we have to go back to where it all began. When my mother first married Mr. James Benson. I was 10 years old at the time, a quiet girl who had learned to survive on the love of my mother. My father had passed away when I was very young, leaving my mother, Evelyn, to raise me on her own. She was a strong woman, determined to provide me with a better life. So, when she met James Benson, a wealthy, charming businessman, she thought she had found the perfect man to give us stability. First, he was kind. I still remember the early days when he would bring me small gifts and smile warmly at me. Emily, I hope you know you're part of this family now, he had said, ruffling my hair. I believed him. But everything changed the moment my mother became his wife. We moved into Mr. Benson's grand house. A mansion compared to the tiny apartment my mother and I had lived in. It had high ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, and a massive staircase that made me feel like I had stepped into a fairy tale. But fairy tales always have a dark twist. The first time I realized my place in the house was the morning after the wedding. I had woken up excited, expecting breakfast with my new family. Instead, I found myself being shaken awake by my new stepfather's deep, stern voice. "Emily, get up. It's time for you to earn your place in this house." Confused and still groggy, I rubbed my eyes. "What do you mean?" He crossed his arms, his warm smile from before completely gone. "You're not a child anymore. If you want to live under my roof, you need to pull your weight." That morning, while my mother was still sleeping, he handed me a broom. "Start with the floors," he ordered. "And after that, wash the dishes." I blinked at him, unsure if this was some sort of joke. But one look at his face told me he wasn't playing. That was the first day I became the housemaid. At 10 years old. While I scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and folded laundry, Naomi, his daughter, lived like a queen. She was the same age as me, but you'd never know it. She was spoiled beyond belief, her closet overflowing with designer dresses, her room filled with expensive dolls and toys. She never lifted a finger, never had to pour herself a glass of water. Why would she, when she had me to do it for her? "Emily, bring me my hairbrush," she would command from her spot on the couch. "Emily, I spilled my juice. Clean it up." "Emily, Dad said you have to iron my uniform for school." If I ever hesitated, Naomi would run straight to her father. "Daddy, Emily isn't listening to me." And just like that, Mr. Benson would appear, his face twisted in irritation. "Emily, stop being lazy and do as you're told." It didn't matter if I was tired. It didn't matter if I had schoolwork of my own. In that house, Naomi was royalty and I was nothing more than her servant. At first, my mother noticed what was happening. She saw how I was being treated, how Naomi and her father were turning me into a housemaid. One evening, she confronted him. "James, Emily is just a child. She shouldn't be doing all of this alone." I had been standing behind the kitchen door, listening with hope in my heart. Maybe, just maybe, my mother would put an end to my suffering. But Mr. Benson's response was cold. "Evelyn, I provide for this house. I put food on the table. The least Emily can do is help around the house. Or do you want me to send you both back to where you came from?" Silence filled the air. I held my breath, waiting for my mother to fight back. But she didn't. She lowered her gaze, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "She's just a little girl, James," she whispered. "And little girls grow up," he snapped. "She needs to learn responsibility. Unless you want to take over her chores." My mother didn't respond. And just like that, I knew I was on my own. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. As I grew older, my responsibilities only increased. Cooking, cleaning, washing, ironing, while Naomi lived in luxury. By the time we turned 16, she had everything a teenage girl could want. She had a car, designer clothes, a personal allowance, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, I had a never-ending list of chores and no one to turn to. The only thing that kept me going was school. I worked hard, studied late at night when everyone was asleep, determined to get good grades so I could leave that house forever. And then one day my mother passed away. She had been sick for a while, but she never told me how bad it was. When she died, something inside me broke. I had lost the only person who had ever truly cared for me. And in that moment I realized something terrifying. I was now completely alone in that house. Mr. Benson didn't even bother pretending to care. The day after the funeral, while I was still grieving, he handed me a mop and said, "The floor is dirty. Clean it." That was the day I promised myself. One day they will feel what I felt. One day I would switch our roles. And when Mr. Benson fell ill, that day finally came. As I sat on the couch, watching Naomi struggle to care for our father, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. For years I had been their servant. Now it was their turn. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. Naomi was failing. I sat comfortably in the living room, lazily flipping through a magazine while Naomi scrambled around, trying to manage everything at once. The sounds of her frustration echoed through the house, clattering dishes, frustrated sighs, and the occasional annoyed huff when things didn't go her way. "Dad, I'm coming," she called out as she rushed from the kitchen, a bowl of soup in her hands. Her feet barely crossed the threshold of our father's room before disaster struck. The soup bowl tipped and steaming liquid splashed onto her wrist. She shrieked, nearly dropping the entire bowl, but caught it just in time. Some of the soup still landed on the floor, forming a messy puddle beside the bed. Mr. Benson, pale and weak from his illness, groaned from where he lay. Please just bring it here. She set the bowl down on the bedside table, cradling her burned wrist. This is impossible, she muttered, frustration lining every word. From my spot in the living room I smirked. Oh, but it was possible because I had done it for years. Not too long ago I had been the one running around doing everything while Naomi sat back and enjoyed her life. He never cared if I was tired. She never cared if my hands were burned from scrubbing floors or if my back ached from standing in the kitchen for hours. But now she was the one struggling. And it was a beautiful sight to behold. Naomi, I called out sweetly, leaning back into the couch. You missed a spot on the floor. You might want to clean that up before Dad slips on it. She turned to glare at me, her jaw tightening. Emily, enough. I raised an eyebrow. Enough of what? Enough of this game, she snapped. You're doing this on purpose. I closed my magazine with a soft thud and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Doing what exactly? You know what, she seethed. You're making me do everything while you sit there and act like you used to? I finished for her. The silence that followed was thick. She knew it was true. For years, I had been forced to handle everything while she lived like a princess. Now that the tables had turned, she couldn't handle a fraction of what I had endured. Her eyes darkened, her frustration bubbling over. Dad is sick. This isn't about chores anymore. He needs help. I tilted my head. And I gave him all the help he needed for years while you did nothing. Now it's your turn. What's the problem? She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She had no defense. She knew she had never lifted a finger for our father when he was healthy. She had no idea how to take care of someone, no idea how exhausting it was to cook, clean, and care for another human being every single day. But I did. And now she would learn. Mr. Benson groaned, shifting uncomfortably in his bed. His once strong frame was now thin and frail, his sickness draining the life out of him. He looked at me, his tired eyes pleading. Emily. He murmured. Please. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. Please what? I asked softly. He swallowed, his throat dry. Please. Help. A few months ago those words would have meant everything to me. I had spent years craving his approval, years hoping he would see me as more than just the house servant he had turned me into. I had wanted him to acknowledge me, to appreciate me, to love me the way he loved Naomi. But now his words meant nothing. You need to rest, Mr. Benson, I said coldly, standing up. Naomi will take care of you. He flinched at the formality in my voice. I had always called him Dad before. Now I refused to. I walked past Naomi, who was still standing frozen, and headed toward the kitchen. I wasn't leaving to cook or clean. I was leaving to enjoy the one thing I had never been allowed to have in that house. Freedom. Hours passed, and the house was filled with nothing but Naomi's frustrated grumbles and Mr. Benson's weak coughs. I lounged on the patio, sipping on a cool glass of lemonade, basking in the feeling of finally not being the one responsible for everything. Then, crash. A loud shatter came from inside the house. Curious, I stood and walked back in to find Naomi kneeling on the kitchen floor, tears streaming down her face. A broken plate lay shattered beside her, soup spilled all over the tiles. She was shaking. I can't do this, she whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. Giving up already? She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. How did you do this for years? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked over and crouched beside her, looking her dead in the eye. Because I had to, I said simply. I didn't have a choice. Just like you don't now. She let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing what I had gone through every single day. And she was breaking under the pressure. Mr. Benson's health was declining, and Naomi was drowning under the weight of responsibilities she had never carried before. She had never known what it was like to be the one others depended on. She had never felt exhaustion from long days of labor, never gone to bed with aching muscles and a heavy heart. But now she did. Now she was experiencing everything she had forced me to endure. And I had no intention of saving her. Not yet. Not until she had suffered enough to understand the pain she had caused me all those years. Naomi was unraveling. The once pampered princess who had never lifted a finger in her life was now drowning in responsibilities she never imagined would fall on her. Her usually perfect hair was a tangled mess, her designer clothes stained with food and sweat, and her eyes were constantly rimmed with exhaustion. She had underestimated the weight of the burden I had carried for years. And now she was paying the price. It was early morning when Naomi stormed into my room, her face twisted with frustration. "Emily, I can't do this anymore," she snapped, standing in the doorway like an angry queen demanding obedience. I looked up from my book, feigning confusion. "Do what?" "Everything," she practically screamed. "Dad needs medicine, food, and help getting to the bathroom. The house is a mess. The laundry is piling up. And I..." She stopped abruptly, her lips trembling. "I don't know how to do it all," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I marked my place in the book and set it aside." "Oh," I said, tilting my head. "I thought taking care of the house was easy." She glared at me. "Not when you're the only one doing it." A smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. "Exactly." Her breathing hitched, realization dawning in her tired eyes. For years she had watched me struggle. She had seen me juggle the housework, cook for the family, clean up after her, and take care of Mr. Benson without a single word of appreciation. Now she finally understood what it felt like. And she hated it. Mr. Benson was getting weaker by the day. His once commanding voice had turned into a frail whisper, and his strong hands now trembled with weakness. But his pride remained intact. He refused to acknowledge how much he had wronged me. Even now, as Naomi struggled to care for him as she failed over and over again, he never looked at me with regret. Never once apologized. But I knew he felt it. Late at night, when he thought I wasn't watching, I caught him staring at me from his bed, his tired eyes filled with something I had never seen before: shame. It was too late for apologies now. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find Naomi curled up on the floor, crying. She didn't notice me at first, too lost in her own misery. Her hands were shaking, her hair disheveled, and her designer blouse was stained with food. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Rough day." She lifted her head sharply, glaring at me through her tears. "Why are you just standing there?" she snapped. "Aren't you going to help?" I shrugged. "Why should I?" Her face crumpled. "Because I can't do this alone." I let out a small laugh. "Oh, but I did. For years. And you never cared." She wiped her tears roughly, anger flashing in her eyes. "I didn't know it was this hard." "That's the problem, Naomi," I said coolly. "You never tried to know. You never bothered to see how much I was suffering. And now, you expect me to save you." Her lip trembled and she dropped her gaze to the floor. "I don't know how to do this, Emily," she admitted. "I don't know how to be strong like you." For the first time, her voice wasn't filled with arrogance. It was filled with fear. She was breaking. And I could have helped her. But I wasn't ready to let her off that easily. Not yet. That night, I watched as Naomi struggled to feed Mr. Benson. She held the spoon awkwardly, her hands unsteady. "Here, Dad," she murmured, bringing the spoon to his lips. He barely opened his mouth before some of the soup spilled down his chin. Naomi winced. "I'm sorry," she whispered, quickly grabbing a napkin to wipe his face. Mr. Benson let out a weak cough, his voice hoarse. "You have to be careful, Naomi." She swallowed hard. "I know. She cut herself off, closing her eyes for a brief moment before taking a shaky breath. I could tell she wanted to give up. But there was no one left to take over. Just like when I had wanted to give up, there had been no one to take over for me. I stood in the doorway watching silently. And for the first time in her life, Naomi finally understood what it meant to be powerless. To be trapped. To be alone. And I wasn't going to save her. Not yet. Naomi was falling apart and I enjoyed every second of it. For years she had watched me struggle. She had walked past me as I scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and took care of her father without offering so much as a single helping hand. She had laughed with her friends while I toiled away like a servant in my own home. But now she was me. And I was her. The shift in power was intoxicating. Morning came with chaos. Naomi had overslept. Again. She had barely closed her eyes for 3 hours before the weight of responsibility forced her awake. She stumbled out of bed, groggy and disoriented, realizing she had forgotten to set an alarm. The smell of burnt food filled the house. I sat at the dining table, casually scrolling through my phone as smoke billowed from the kitchen. A second later, Naomi came running in, her face twisted in panic. Shit, 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 she muttered, grabbing a towel and frantically trying to put out whatever disaster she had created. Mr. Benson coughed weakly from the other room. Naomi. I'm coming, Dad, she called out, voice laced with exhaustion. I took a sip of my coffee, watching her struggle. You forgot breakfast? She shot me a sharp glare before turning back to the stove. No, I got distracted. I let out a quiet hum. Sounds familiar. Naomi ignored me, too busy scraping the burnt food off the pan. But the damage was done. She was already behind schedule and her father was waiting. By the time she got to Mr. Benson's room with a plate of half-burnt toast and watery tea, he looked at her with something close to disappointment. She placed the tray on the table beside his bed, forcing a smile. Here, Dad. He glanced at the food, then at her. What is this? He fidgeted. Breakfast. This isn't food, Naomi, he muttered. It looks awful. Naomi clenched her fists. I tried. You didn't try hard enough. I saw it then, the moment her heart cracked just a little. Because that was exactly what he had told me so many times before. Later that afternoon, Naomi sat slumped on the couch, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair, once glossy and perfect, was now a frizzy mess. She looked like me when I had been the one breaking under the weight of responsibility. I took my time approaching her, enjoying the scene before me. Tired. She didn't even have the energy to glare at me. Yes, she admitted. I sat beside her, my tone casual. Now imagine doing this every single day for years. He stiffened. I continued, my voice soft but sharp. Imagine never getting a break. Imagine having no one to help you. Imagine being ignored while you're suffering. Naomi swallowed hard. She didn't need to imagine it. He was living it. By evening, Naomi was done. She sat at the dinner table, staring blankly at the wall while Mr. Benson picked at his food, unimpressed. Then, for the first time since his illness began, he spoke words I never expected to hear. Emily, he murmured, his weak voice cutting through the silence. I glanced up from my plate. Yes. His eyes, once filled with authority, now held something unfamiliar, guilt. Did I do this to you? He asked softly. The room went silent. Naomi's breath hitched and she slowly turned to look at him. I set my fork down, meeting his gaze. Yes, I said simply. You did. He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. I was wrong. The words hit the air like a confession. Naomi's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Mr. Benson finally saw the truth, saw what he had done to me. But the question was it too late? Mr. Benson never fully recovered. His illness left him frail, dependent on Naomi in ways he had never been dependent on anyone before. The once proud man who had barked orders and treated me like a servant could barely lift a spoon without help. Naomi? She was no longer the spoiled princess she had once been. She had been humbled. She had been broken. And whether she admitted it or not, she had finally learned the hard way what it meant to be powerless. One evening, I found Naomi sitting alone in the living room, staring at nothing. She was different now. Quieter. Smaller. She had lost the arrogance that once defined her. I sat across from her, waiting. After a long silence, she finally spoke. I get it now, she murmured. I raised an eyebrow. Get what? Her fingers clenched around the fabric of her sweater. Everything. She turned to me, and for the first time in her life, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. I treated you horribly, she whispered. I let Dad treat you like a slave while I lived like a queen. And I never once thought about how unfair it was. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear more. Naomi exhaled, shaking her head. But when I had to take care of everything, when I had to struggle, I hated it. I wanted to run away. And that's when I realized. He swallowed. You must have felt like that every single day for years. My throat tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. And still, she continued, voice trembling, you never ran away. You never gave up. She looked at me, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to say more. Instead, she just whispered, I'm sorry. It was the first time Naomi had ever apologized to me for anything. A week later, Mr. Benson called me into his room. He was weaker now, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was something in his eyes, something I had never seen before. Regret. Emily, he rasped. I stood by the door waiting. His hands trembled as he reached out slightly. Come closer. I hesitated before stepping forward. He looked up at me, his once proud expression gone. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said slowly. But I need you to know. I was wrong. For the first time in my life I saw him as something more than my tormentor. I saw him as a broken man. And for the first time I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. I could have chosen revenge. But I didn't. I chose peace. And for the first time in my life I was free.